Billionaires often live lives full of power, money, and control, but some of their deaths were far from peaceful and left behind more questions than answers. In this video, we'll look at 5 real stories of the most disturbing billionaire deaths of all time. These aren't just tragic accidents or natural causes. These are strange, suspicious, and in some cases truly horrifying ends to some of the richest lives ever lived.
Barry and Honey Sherman were found dead in their home in Toronto on December 15th, 2017.
It was a cold December afternoon, December 15th, 2017, in one of Toronto's most exclusive neighborhoods. A realtor arrived at a $5.5 million mansion to give a midday tour. Everything seemed routine until she stepped into the basement. There, beside the edge of an indoor pool, sat 2 figures fully clothed, eerily still. It was Barry and Honey Sherman, one of Canada's wealthiest and most influential couples. They weren't lying down. They were seated, upright. Belts had been wrapped tightly around their necks, fastened to a metal railing. Honey's face showed signs of bruising. Barry, strangely, had no visible injuries at all. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. Nothing stolen, no forced entry, no weapon, just 2 lifeless bodies in a quiet basement and silence. At first, police didn't even know what to call it. Suspicious was the word they used. But 6 weeks later, in January 2018, they changed course. This wasn't a tragic accident or a bizarre coincidence. It was a double homicide. The cause of death: ligature neck compression, strangled by something like a strap or cord, likely after being restrained. The deaths sent shockwaves across Canada. Barry Sherman wasn't just rich, he was powerful. He founded Apotex, a pharmaceutical giant that made billions producing generic drugs. His estimated net worth, over $3 billion. He was a generous philanthropist, too, more than $50 million given to charities. Honey was widely known for her kindness, her community work. They were a power couple with deep roots in business, politics, and philanthropy. But Barry's world was far from simple. He had enemies. Legal disputes, corporate rivals, even family turned against him. One name stood out: Kerry Winter, Barry's own cousin. Once like a son to Barry, their relationship had disintegrated into bitterness and billion-dollar lawsuits. In a shocking interview, Kerry openly admitted that police should have considered him a suspect. Then he dropped a bombshell. He believed Barry killed Honey, then staged the scene before ending his own life. Kerry claimed Barry was cracking under pressure. Financial strain, legal battles, memory problems, growing isolation. He described an argument between Barry and Honey, supposedly over a house she wanted. He believed Barry snapped, but Barry and Honey's children, Jonathan, Lauren, Alexandra, and Kaylin, rejected that theory entirely. They were convinced their parents had been murdered. They hired private investigators, ordered a second autopsy, and uncovered something the first missed: marks on both victims' wrists, restraint marks, more evidence of foul play. Toronto police agreed and continued the case as a double homicide. The timeline only deepened the mystery. Barry and Honey were last seen alive on December 13th. For 2 days, there was nothing. Then the discovery: no forced entry, no signs of a break-in, no indoor cameras. A lockbox may have been accessed, but by who? Someone with access. Someone they may have trusted. Then came the footage, chilling and grainy. A lone figure walking near the home on the night of the 13th. Their walk was off, a distinct limp, with a strange upward kick of the right heel. This person has never been identified, but police called them a suspect. Despite a $35 million reward, no arrests have ever been made. Theories swirled. Barry's financial dealings were complicated. He was known to lend money to lots of people. He was locked in lawsuits, including one involving $150,000. Thousands gathered for the Shermans' funeral, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Their son Jonathan spoke through tears. "They didn't choose this," he said. "They were taken from us. Years have passed, but the wounds remain raw." Their daughter described life without them as a nightmare. Jonathan later raised the reward money again, desperate for closure. The house, once a symbol of success and status, has been demolished. It was May 6th, 2014, in the city of Nice, France. But what happened that evening would shake Monaco's elite and expose a chilling truth behind one of Europe's wealthiest families. 77-year-old Hélène Pastor had just visited her son, Gildo, at l'Arche Hospital. He was recovering from a stroke, and despite her immense fortune, she showed up like any devoted mother: quiet, routine, understated. She stepped into her dark Lancia Voyager, driven by her trusted chauffeur, Mohamed Darouih. Then, just after 7 p.m., As the van pulled out of the hospital parking lot, it happened. A masked man dressed in dark clothes appeared. He didn't speak. He raised a sawed-off shotgun and opened fire. Glass shattered, metal buckled, blood spilled. The shooting was fast and methodical. Mohammed and Hélène were hit multiple times in the face, chest, and stomach. The gunman fled into a waiting getaway car. This wasn't random. It was an execution. Both were rushed to St. Roch Hospital. Mohammed died 5 days later. Hélène briefly woke from a coma, telling police she was scared. There was more to share. But on May 21st, she too passed away. Her murder rocked the principality. Hélène Pastor wasn't just another wealthy figure. She was Monaco's quiet queen of real estate. Her grandfather arrived in 1880 from Italy and built an empire. Hélène oversaw iconic buildings like La Bahia and the Gildo Pastor Center. The family's fortune? Over 20 billion euros. Yet Hélène lived modestly. She walked her dog. She drove a London taxi. She avoided the spotlight. But it wasn't a stranger who betrayed her. It was family. The investigation spanned cities. In Marseille, over 200 kilometers away, security cameras caught 2 men buying burner phones and taking a train to Nice. Hotel DNA, phone records, and surveillance footage all pointed to Samin Saad Ahmed and Alher Hamadi. Both denied everything. But they had followed Hélène, watched her, waited. Still, someone had sent them. That someone? Wojciech Janowski, Helene's son-in-law, a polished diplomat, businessman, and partner to her daughter Sylvia. But behind the honorifics was a man in deep debt. Even 500,000 euros a month from Hélène wasn't enough. In June 2014, Janowski confessed. He'd asked his personal trainer, Pascal Dauriac, to help solve his problem. Dauriac connected the dots to the hitmen. The payment? 250,000 euros. Janowski later tried to retract his confession. Too late. Dauriac told police Janowski called Hélène a monster and even visited the hospital to check the scene. In 2018, 10 people were tried. Sylvia was cleared, but the courtroom heard it all. Every lie, every greedy move, every desperate plan. In October, Janowski was sentenced to life in prison. The illusion was shattered. Monaco's polished surface cracked wide open. Beneath the wealth and titles was a man who murdered for money, a man who couldn't wait for inheritance, so he tried to steal it. It was December 3rd, 1999 in Monaco, a place known for wealth, security, and silence. But on that cold winter night, inside one of the country's most heavily fortified penthouses, a fire broke out. Not just any apartment. This one belonged to Edmond J. Safra, a billionaire banker, a legend in global finance, and a man who had spent his entire life building walls to keep danger out. Edmond Safra, 67, had been living with Parkinson's disease. He was frail, dependent on nurses for his daily needs. That night, he and one of his caregivers, Vivian Torrenti, would never make it out alive. They died, not in a public scandal or financial crisis, but locked inside a bathroom, hiding, suffocating, terrified. And the man who set the fire? Someone who was supposed to protect him. To understand why this tragedy hit so hard, you have to know who Edmond Safra was. He was born August 6, 1932, in Beirut, Lebanon. His family came from the Sephardic Jewish community, with roots in Aleppo, Syria. His father, Jacob Safra, founded a bank in 1920. And by the time Edmond was 16, he was already trading currency and precious metals. He was brilliant, fast, precise. By 1949, just a teenager, he made $40 million in gold trades. He used it to start Trade Development Bank in Geneva. He wrote the ledgers in ancient Arabic script, a nod to his heritage. By 1966, he founded the Republic National Bank of New York. It became one of the biggest in the city, second only to giants like Chase and Citigroup. From Switzerland to Brazil to Monaco, his empire quietly expanded. By the 1990s, he was worth over $2.5 billion. He sold his banking group to HSBC for $10 billion in 1999. But Safra was never just about money. He gave it away as quickly as he made it. Hospitals, synagogues, research centers, children's charities. His name funded them all. Yet, he stayed out of the spotlight. His Monaco penthouse was a fortress. Steel-reinforced walls, secret escape routes, private security. Nothing left to chance. Except that night, there were no bodyguards, and one of the people inside, meant to care for him, had other plans. Ted Meher was a former U.S. Green Beret, recently hired as one of Safra's personal nurses. He wanted more trust, more status, more attention. He reportedly felt sidelined by other staff and hatched a plan to win Safra's favor. Just before dawn, Maher set a small fire in a trash bin, thinking he could put it out himself, rush in, and be the hero. But fires don't listen to scripts. The flames spread. Smoke filled the penthouse. Panic took over. Safra and Nurse Vivian locked themselves inside the bathroom, terrified. This wasn't paranoia. They feared it was an assassination attempt. Safra had powerful enemies in Russia, the Middle East, the banking world. Anything felt possible. But it wasn't a contract killer or masked intruder. It was Ted. Outside, Safra's wife Lily made it to the balcony. Firefighters arrived, but couldn't get through the steel-reinforced walls. It was too late. By the time they reached the bathroom, both Safra and Vivian were gone, killed by smoke inhalation, alone, in the place meant to protect them. At first, the world thought it was an attack. Rumors swirled, but Maher's story crumbled. Investigators noticed inconsistencies. Too many, too obvious. He eventually admitted what he'd done. In 2002, he was convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years. He escaped from prison in 2003, but was quickly caught again. He served his time and was released in 2007. Years later, in 2022, he was arrested again in Texas on unrelated charges. It seemed the man who wanted to be a hero never stopped chasing attention. Edmond Safra's death left behind more than grief. It left a silence. His fortune, much of it, went to the Edmond J. Safra Foundation, supporting hundreds of causes across the world. Lily, his widow, carried on that legacy until her own death in 2022.
German billionaire Adolf Merckle's family say he took his own life, broken by weeks of struggling to salvage his vast business empire. The 74-year-old was hit by a train and killed on this lonely stretch of railway track.
It was January 5th, 2009, in Blaubeuren, Germany. The temperature had plunged to minus 15 degrees Celsius. Around 5 p.m., Adolf Merckle, one of the richest men in Europe, told his wife he was heading to the office. He stepped into his modest Volkswagen Golf, the same car he always drove, and disappeared into the snow. But Adolf never reached his office. Instead, he drove just over 2 miles to a secluded railway embankment on the edge of town. In the deepening cold, with snow falling all around him, the 74-year-old billionaire stepped out of his car, climbed the icy slope, and began walking toward the tracks. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Later that night, a passing train crew noticed something strange near the tracks. A second train was sent to investigate. What they found was grim, a body. A man had been struck and killed. Nearby, the engine still ticking in the freezing dark, was Adolf's parked car. Inside was a note, just 2 words handwritten, "I'm sorry." His family had already reported him missing. And just like that, the empire he had spent a lifetime building collapsed into a single, haunting question. How does a billionaire end up here? To answer that, you have to go back to the beginning. Adolf Merckle was born in 1934 in Dresden during the rise of Nazi Germany. His family fled during World War II, eventually settling in Blaubeuren. He studied law but didn't stay on that path for long. In 1967, he took over a small family pharmaceutical company with just 80 employees. By 1973, he had founded Radiopharm, Germany's first generic drug manufacturer. Over the decades, he quietly constructed a vast industrial empire. He owned stakes in Heidelberg Cement, one of the world's biggest cement producers, and Phoenix Pharmahandel, a major pharmaceutical distributor. His private firm, VM Vermogensverwaltung, managed it all. At its height, his businesses generated nearly 35 billion euros annually. He employed over 100,000 people across Europe. By 2008, Forbes listed him as the 94th richest person in the world, worth $9.2 billion. But for all his power and influence, Adolf Merckle was known for his modesty. No yachts, no headlines. He loved the mountains, often hiking and skiing in the Alps, the Andes, even the Himalayas. He avoided the spotlight, built quietly, and trusted only a small circle of advisors. The 2008 global financial crisis didn't just shake Wall Street. It cracked the foundations of Merckle's empire. His holding company had taken on enormous loans, secured with stock. When the market crashed, so did the value of those shares, by more than 75%. The banks came calling, and Adolf had signed personal guarantees. But that wasn't the worst of it. In a high-stakes move, Merckle had bet that Volkswagen stock would drop. It didn't. In fact, in one of the most vicious short squeezes in financial history, the price skyrocketed after Porsche announced it secretly held the majority of VW shares. The stock shot from 210 euros to over 1,000 euros in 2 days. Adolf Merckle lost €500 million. The media turned on him. He was painted as reckless, arrogant. The man who once quietly ran a pharmaceutical empire was now headline fodder, under attack from every direction. But still, he fought. He negotiated with over 30 banks, trying to save what he could. On January 4th, 2009, just one day before his death, he secured a 400 million euros loan. But the price was devastating. He had to give up control of Radiopharm, Heidelberg Cement, and Phoenix Pharmahandel. Everything he'd built, gone. Just a month earlier, another rescue loan had been blocked. And now, even the win felt like a loss. By the first week of January, Merckle's businesses had lost nearly half their value. The pressure was unbearable. He was 74, a grandfather, a man who had weathered decades of economic storms. But this time, the collapse wasn't just on paper. On January 6th, his family released a statement. They said he had been overwhelmed by the hopelessness of the financial situation. There had been no foul play, no outside hands, just a man crushed by the weight of everything he'd built and the fear of watching it all disappear. His death sent shockwaves through Germany. Stocks in his companies plummeted. The banks kept negotiating, but something had changed. Because for decades, Adolf Merckle had been a ghost in the boardroom, quiet, private. He climbed from post-war rubble to industrial power. He gave thousands of people jobs. He changed medicine across Europe. And yet, in the end, he stood alone on a frozen railway track in the dark under a blanket of snow. It was July 3rd, 2018, in Boner. 57-year-old Wang Jian was one of the most powerful businessmen in China, the co-founder and chairman of HNA Group, a massive corporate empire with ties across the globe. To the outside world, he was practically invisible, but in boardrooms from Beijing to Berlin, Wang's influence was undeniable. He owned a 15% stake in an empire worth $230 billion. HNA wasn't just a Chinese company. It had its hands in Hilton hotels, Deutsche Bank, airport services, logistics, aviation. 400,000 employees answered to a machine he helped build. Wang had studied aviation management in China. Later, he earned an MBA in the Netherlands. He was sharp, calculated, obsessively private. His business partner, Chen Feng, was the one who smiled for cameras. Wang stayed in the background, pulling levers. But on that summer morning, he wasn't in a boardroom. He was on vacation, on a quick break from a business trip. A few photos, a few views, that was all he wanted. He and his travel companion wandered toward the upper church in Boner, a scenic spot overlooking the lush cedrus forest. There was a low stone wall at the edge. Tourists often stood there to pose for pictures. Wang climbed up. A moment later, he slipped. Witnesses said he may have moved too quickly or lost his footing. The fall was nearly 50 feet, sudden and silent. When rescuers arrived, they found him gravely injured. Wang Jian was pronounced dead at the scene. At first, police treated it like any tragic accident. There were no signs of foul play, just a body, a wall, and a drop. But within hours, something strange began happening. News of Wang's death exploded on Chinese social media. His name trended instantly, then vanished just as fast. Posts were taken down. Comments disappeared. Accounts discussing the fall were silenced without explanation, and that silence said more than any headline. Back at HNA headquarters, the company's website turned gray, a sign of mourning. They released a formal tribute calling Wang a visionary and a man of profound insight. But behind those polished words was panic, because HNA was in trouble, big trouble. For years, the company had been on a wild global shopping spree, buying real estate, airlines, banking shares, most of it financed with debt. By the end of 2017, that debt ballooned to $95 billion. Chinese regulators were starting to crack down. The government wanted companies like HNA to scale back, sell assets, reduce risk. Wang and his team began offloading pieces of the empire. Hilton shares, Deutsche Bank, entire subsidiaries. Deals were falling apart. One major Australian acquisition collapsed due to funding issues. In New Zealand, regulators blocked another. The empire was shaking. And then Wang died. Just weeks before the fall, he reportedly sent an internal message to executives. It warned of unknown forces working to sabotage HNA. The message was vague. After his death, HNA's bond prices plummeted. Investors panicked. The company had already been labeled a gray rhino, a massive, visible risk that everyone chose to ignore until it charged. Wang's family flew to France to recover his body. His wife, his brother, Wang Wei. Grief rippled through their private circle. To them, he wasn't just the architect of a financial empire. He was a husband, a brother, a son. But even in death, questions followed him.